As we get closer to Wrath of the Lich King coming out on Live Realms, everybody probably wants to know what classes are performing the best and what is going to do the most DPS. In particular, what are the 3 top DPS classes in Wrath of the Lich King for Phase 1? We can't make an accurate estimate of how things are going to pan out for the rest of the phases. Now, I say 3 because I think it honestly makes just kind of a better thumbnail for YouTube, but in reality, there's actually a special mention for a 4th class at the end of this video. You might not want to be the person who chooses a class even though you've heard a lot of hype about it, and it might actually be underperforming in this version of the game. Things are a little bit different than on private servers, and things in Classic are always going to be optimized in a little bit different of ways. So with that being said, let's dive right in and let's give you my top 3 DPS choices, actually 4 classes in Wrath of the Lich King Phase 1. Starting at number 3 is gonna be the Warlock. In particular, I'm gonna mention Demonology Warlock. Although Affliction is bugged on the beta, Demonology Warlocks have this incredible AoE and sustain damage overall, as well as some amazing huge burst windows within normal single target raid situations. Now, Warlocks in TBC were amazingly powerful, but honestly, kind of not the most intricate class to play. This fully changes moving into Wrath of the Lich King. Although some of your AoE rotation is the same, with abilities like Seed of Corruption still being a massive part of your AoE rotation, Demonology Warlocks get amazing CDs with Metamorphosis, which will basically turn you into a demon yourself. You're actually probably going to need a Hand of Protection whenever you are using all of your CDs for your huge AoE burst windows. The sustain damage and sustain AoE from Demonology Warlocks is just almost unmatched, but this is also giving them huge burst windows whenever they have Metamorphosis off of cooldown every 2 minutes. So what Metamorphosis does is it is a 36-second, because of 6 extra seconds from the glyph, CD, where you are buffed up doing 20% extra damage, and you also, having been turned into a demon, have extra abilities. Every single raid will want to run at least one Demonology Warlock for this ability right here, Demonic Pact. It basically has, whenever your pet crits, you get a buff to all of the entire raid, giving them 10% of your spell damage. And this does snapshot. There was an issue originally where every time your pet got a crit, it would override the stronger demonic pacts. So your pet wasn't even able to DPS. You would get a huge crit when you were snapshotting early on in a fight, and then you would pull your pet back and just kind of have him sit there. But now they've actually dealt with this. This is a really welcome change from Blizzard. Now, it's really because of this high sustain AoE damage and demonic pact that I rate Demonology Warlock so high. They also are generally chosen to get a lot of the gear early on, because every piece of gear that you give to your Demo Lock is a boost for your entire raid, because everything that the Demo Lock gets will increase the demonic pact buff, and everyone in the raid gets a little bit extra damage. If you want a really in-depth Demo Lock guide, make sure you check out Crix's channel. I'll have a link in the description, but he has an extremely in-depth Demo Lock guide, so make sure to check that out. Coming in at number 2 on my list is gonna be the Death Knight. Now, I'm actually talking about both Frost and dual wield unholy specs here. Now, we were seeing a lot of people use a bugged sigil on the beta, which is this icy touch sigil. Don't really worry about that. There is a lot of logs, a crazy amount of logs, and a crazy amount of testing being done with people not using this sigil. But also on the beta, there is a bug where one death rune can act as all 3 runes at one time. This is also juicing up the overall damage of DKs, and it's hard to play around. Now, Frost spec is definitely easier to learn than dual wield unholy. It is a really fun spec. There are a lot of ways to optimize it, and I do have a guide out on the channel, so I'll have a link to that in the description if you want to know everything about it. But also on top of that, dual wield unholy is an amazing spec, the Morbin Time spec, which is really shooting up in the public eye as made popular by White Wolf, and I'll have a short guide coming of that, but realistically his guide is amazing and very in-depth. Where Death Knight's reign supreme is their absolutely massive AoE and single target sustained damage for both of these specs. As Frost, you kind of feel like an old school Fury Warrior with world buffs, just running in and destroying everything, and you also have way higher AoE than what Warriors ever had, with things like Pestilence to spread all of your diseases, and realistically the big one, Howling Blast. Frost DKs have amazing AoE burst, although their AoE sustain is a lot less than Unholy because it's a lot more reliant on procs. but if you do get those procs, you can kill things before anyone else can do any damage to them. Now, Unholy, on the other hand, is looking insanely strong, but most of the time that's because people are using the bug sigil I was talking about before, which is snapshotting with your gargoyle to do ridiculous amounts of damage. Even without this sigil, Unholy DK has the most insane burst damage on any boss fight currently. Now, Death Knights were introduced as a hero class in this new expansion, and that's exactly what they are. And with that being said, if you have any questions again about either Frost or Unholy DK, make sure to check out the guides on the channel, and let's move on to the number 1 class in this video. The class that I am rating as number 1 in this video and number 1 in phase 1 of Wrath of the Lich King is actually gonna be the Shaman. In particular, I am talking about the Spell-Enhanced Shaman. Now, the difference between Spell-Enhanced Shaman and normal Enhancement Shaman is very, very minimal in actual playstyle, although the damage is actually massive. And the damage is massive mainly for overall. The single target is almost exactly the same. A good Enhancement Shaman is going to shine so far above the rest. Enhancement Shaman is honestly one of the most fun classes I've ever played in Wrath of the Lich King, and I've only been doing it for a couple days. But on every single global, you have a choice to make about what abilities you're going to use. Are you going to use one of your shocks, Flame Shock or Earth Shock? Are you going to use Storm Strike? Are you going to use Fire Nova? Are you going to use Lava Lash? Or do you have your Maelstrom procs so that you can use a Lightning Bolt or a Chain Lightning? Now, Maelstrom is basically a stacking proc that when it hits 5, will choose your next ability. You are going to utilize your Maelstrom procs whenever they happen, and it's either going to be Lightning Bolt or Chain Lightning as your spenders. Shamans bring a lot of massive utility to the raid. With totems, Shamans are one of the only classes, if not the only class, that has absolutely unique abilities. First of all, with enhancing totems, your Strength of Earth totem is going to be stronger than anything a Death Knight can put out with their Horn of Winter, so your totem will give more of a buff to the raid. But the one that's the most unique is going to be your Wrath of Air totem, giving spell haste to your raid, which is something that no other class can bring. Also, you do have Bloodlust and Heroism, which is another ability that no other class can bring. Ghost Wolves are on a 3-minute CD, and they also give you this amazing sprint, giving Shamans this awesome mobility that you can use to get around throughout a raid. One thing you should note is that Fire Nova, this new ability that goes off of any of your flame totems, and it's a 3-second CD now that you're going to be glyphing into it, is massive damage, and you always want to be using it whenever you can, but it does come out of your fire totem. So if you place your magma totem away from the rest of the mobs and you're using Fire Nova, you're actually not going to hit all of the targets. So one thing you really need to watch out for is making sure that you're placing your magma totem in a good spot. And do know that magma totem or any fire totems will always come out on the front left of your character. Enhancement Shamans also bring a 10% attack power buff, but you can get that from Blood DK or Marksman Hunters, so it's not necessarily a unique buff to the raid. The big ones are the totems as well as Bloodlust. Enhancement Shaman's only pitfall that I've seen is potentially mana management, but if you're utilizing Shamanistic Rage, which is a 1-minute CD that gives your melee attacks the chance to return mana to you, you shouldn't actually have any issues. You can almost get full mana whenever you're using Shamanistic Rage off of cooldown. Enhancement Shamans are performing ridiculously well in phase 1, and if you want to watch some really good ones, I would highly suggest checking out Just Oro on Twitch, and also there's a guide on YouTube by Anfall that I will have out in the description as well. And now moving on to the class that I have as an honorable mention. That would be the Rogue. Assassination Rogues are going to be the kings of single target throughout the entire expansion, and combat rogues have absolutely massive overall damage. There's also a lot of theory crafting and testing that Simon Eyes is doing, and I'll have a link to his channel in the description, about builds that have basically permanent uptime of Fan of Knives, which if viable would make rogues the absolute kings of DPS throughout this expansion. This is going to be massive if this pans out the same way it's working on the beta, so just keep an eye out for that. So with that being said, rogues are definitely going to be back in the raids in this expansion. We kind of had to take a seat back in TBC, but now it is rogues' time to shine in PvE again. And if any classes didn't make this little short list of the top DPS classes in Wrath of the Lich King phase 1, don't worry about that. If the class you plan on playing isn't one of the Giga meta classes, that doesn't actually matter. If it's something you're going to have fun with, it's always going to bring some sort of buffs to the raid. Every single class in Wrath of the Lich King is viable, and classes will scale ridiculously well later on in the expansion. Things like warriors and ret paladins that will absolutely have their time to shine. Even Alondo is performing insanely well on warrior right now. Anyways, guys, if you want to see any guides, I will be working on short rogue guides, dual unholy guide, marksman hunter guide, and a few others very soon, trying to cover all of the melee classes. Make sure to like and subscribe to the channel. If you have any questions or you want to see me cover your class, make sure to let me know in the comments. And from there, I'll see you guys all on the next one.